I woke up in a stranger's penthouse and his lawyer handed me divorce papers. After rescuing me from a brutal beating, the most dangerous man in the city locked me in his luxury penthouse. I didn't know what he expected from me. But the next morning, he didn't demand my body. He brought in the best lawyer in the state. "You're filing for divorce today," he told me calmly while sipping espresso. He had already documented all my injuries, got a restraining order, and claimed me as his own.
Let us step into the dark together, you and I, because we are starting at absolute rock bottom. The camera pans down to find Mia, her bruised face pressed hard against the freezing bathroom tiles. She tastes copper and salt. Her knuckles are entirely white, gripping the porcelain sink like driftwood in a storm. A cheap overhead bulb hums a steady note, casting a harsh glare over the cracked mirror. She dreads the wreckage in that glass, but she forces her eyes open only to meet a total stranger. A fierce shadow clouds her cheekbone, and her lower lip is split. She holds her aching ribs, breathing the cold air. The hardest lessons always begin when we strip away our comforting illusions, look in the mirror, and finally accept the bitter truth. She whispers the word stupid to her shattered reflection, letting the cold reality wash over her bruised skin. Just beyond that hollow door, the heavy, drunken footsteps of Marcus shake the cramped apartment. Every clink of a glass bottle, every screech of wooden chair legs scraping the linoleum sends a visible, violent tremor directly down her spine. The camera lingers on her tightening muscles as she instinctively braces for the man to come swinging through the frame. Desperate for an anchor, she twists the rusty faucet. Freezing water rushes over her trembling hands, shocking her nervous system and pulling her back from the ledge of complete panic. Hitting absolute rock bottom is a terrifying descent, but that frozen moment of sheer despair is often exactly when we learn how to survive. The lens focuses on the pale, blood-stained water circling the drain, a perfect metaphor for how her self-worth vanished over 2 agonizing years. The deepest tragedy of toxic love is that its gentle beginnings completely blind us to the eventual nightmares. Marcus was not always the monster pacing in the other room. When he first entered the frame, he was pure charm, promising a golden escape from endless double shifts. He showered her with warmth, becoming the solid rock she craved after a lonely life in the foster system. Then came the first strike, followed by his desperate, weeping apologies. We must never let a sad apology blind us to the violent truth, because a wolf shedding human tears is still a hungry wolf. By the second time his heavy fist found her face, Marcus smoothly blamed the intense pressure of losing his factory job. When the third attack finally happened, the tearful apologies were entirely gone, replaced by a freezing, remorseless silence. Back in the stark lighting of the cold bathroom, Mia dabs her damaged skin with a frayed towel, terrified of pressing too hard on the fresh ruin. Moving on pure instinct, she opens the rusty medicine cabinet, reaching right past his shaving gear to find her only true weapons. Heavy foundation, maximum coverage concealer, and a thick setting powder. She carefully paints her face, preparing to walk into the world, acting perfectly fine, pretending everything is totally fine while crumbling inside remains the heaviest burden a human heart can carry. She already has the script memorized for her upcoming shift. She will paste on a flawless smile for the wealthy patrons, pour their expensive vintage wines, and force a light laugh at their hollow jokes. The camera pulls back to show her performing the part perfectly, masking the tragic reality that she has become a mere ghost haunting her own life. When your back is pressed firmly against a concrete wall, survival often depends entirely on the thickness of the mask you wear. Mia clicks off the light and slips into the dark hallway. Marcus is passed out on their ruined couch, a warm beer still gripped tightly in his hand. She glides past the flickering television. Surviving another dark night in the presence of monsters is a massive victory for the fragile human spirit. 5 in the morning arrives, and a shrill alarm yanks Mia straight out of a fitful, shallow sleep. She slams her palm onto the clock, desperate to kill the noise before the unpredictable threat on the couch can wake. Rising from that freezing mattress requires nothing short of superhuman willpower. Her entire body radiates a deep, terrible ache, a pale skin pulling painfully tight over bruises that have blossomed into violent shades of black and purple. The apartment is totally silent, save for Marcus grunting among his empty glass bottles. Moving through the morning shadows, she completes her routine of a scalding shower and heavy layers of makeup. While concealing our deep pain might trick the outside world, we alone must carry the crushing weight of our hidden truths inside the dark. She steps onto the early transit bus at 6:15, sliding directly into the darkest back row to hide whatever flaws her makeup failed to cover. Outside the foggy glass, the city is just beginning to stir, yellow street fighting against the gloom of the early morning sky. Mia rests her burning forehead against the freezing window, watching the empty, rain-slicked streets blur together. She is heading to an exclusive Italian restaurant deep in the heart of the financial district. This is a glowing fortress where ruthless businessmen close massive deals over rich pasta and politicians trade favors in the shadows. Finding a single place on earth where you feel genuinely safe can anchor your existence, and for Mia, this chaotic dining room is her only true sanctuary. The commander of this golden sanctuary is Giuseppe, a massive Italian man in his late 60s who took a chance on a frightened girl. The camera watches him move through the dining room with the heavy, tragic grace of an aging king whose empire is slowly slipping away. He hired Mia when she had nothing but a torn coat, demanding only absolute loyalty in return. The morning light catches the deep, sorrowful lines carved into his weathered face, hinting at a past filled with dark secrets and unspoken regrets. True family is rarely bound by blood, but rather forged in the quiet moments when someone chooses to shelter us from the bitter storm. Giuseppe wipes down the brass espresso machine, casting a protective, fatherly glance toward the heavy front door as Mia finally walks inside. Giuseppe is leaning heavily on his massive wooden desk, looking seriously stressed out. Standing right beside him is a total stranger. Let us look closely at this new player, shall we? He is wearing a charcoal suit that easily costs triple her monthly rent. Giuseppe introduces him as Marco, supposedly here for a private security contract. That lie is so incredibly obvious you could cut it with a knife, but Mia simply nods. Marco sticks his hand out, and Mia hesitates before. The camera pushes in on Marco. He is striking, but it is a cruel kind of beauty that instantly screams danger. His jaw looks carved from cold marble, and those freezing, dead eyes never stop moving, scanning the dim shadows for weak spots. He tells her it is a pleasure to meet her. His voice rolls over her, thick and intoxicating, smoother than 20-year-old bourbon. Mia barely stammers a reply before she flees into the cavernous dining room. Her heart hammers violently against her deeply bruised ribs. She spends hours polishing tables, terrified by his heavy presence. Because here is the brutal truth you and I eventually learn. No matter how high you build your walls, the exact you fear most will always look straight through your clever disguise. The heavy doors do not open until 11, but The stage must be flawlessly set. Mia is scrubbing crystal glasses when a terrifying weight settles on the back of her neck. She snaps around. Marco is leaning against the polished bar, studying her in silence. His sleeves are rolled up, exposing pale, jagged scars across his forearms. Our physical scars are tragic history books written directly on the flesh, broadcasting the violent truths we try to bury. He softly praises her quick hands, and she mutters an excuse about having years of practice. He steps entirely too close, swallowing the air between them. It is a chilling moment of clarity. When pure danger walks right up to your chin, you are instantly forced to figure out exactly how strong you really are. Marco drifts closer, filling the frame. She catches his scent, an expensive cologne, failing to mask the raw violence underneath. Old leather, cold smoke, and burned gunpowder. He casually murmurs that he doubts the boss is actually a kind man. Mia goes dead silent, in a single glass until her knuckles turn white. Then he drops the axe. He plainly names the ugly bruise buried beneath her makeup. Mia forgets how to breathe. The fragile crystal nearly shatters on the floor. She attempts to stutter a denial, but his voice drops to a dark whisper. He lists her physical tells, the slight limp, the tragic flinch. We often convince ourselves we are brilliant at hiding our misery, but a truly sharp observer will always unearth the pain you desperately try to bury. Mia stands consumed by shame and blinding rage, a hot crimson flush rising up her neck. She snaps at Marco, insisting her miserable life is her burden alone to carry. Marco does not flinch. He closes the final inch of distance. His looming presence is suffocating as he murmurs that her battles might soon become his. Cornered desperation breeds a reckless courage, pushing Mia to boldly demand if she is being threatened. A spark of genuine respect flickers in his dark eyes. He softly promises he is no threat, right as Giuseppe shatters the heavy silence, loudly clapping his hands and barking orders across the room. The terrible tension instantly snaps. You and I have both lived this. Sometimes, a sudden burst of chaos is simply the universe throwing down a lifeline, quietly pulling us back from the catastrophic edge of our own impulsive choices. Marco holds Mia in a heavy gaze for just a single heartbeat. You and I know that look well. It is a profound, wordless recognition shared only by souls dragged through the dirt of existence. Breaking the trance, Mia turns away, trembling as her emotional armor cracks. Desperate to outrun a collapse, she throws herself into preparing the private dining room for the Castellano Syndicate. Soon, the true architects of power arrive. Politicians, executives, and even the district attorney take their seats. It is a staggering collision of two worlds. The sobering truth of life is that the very people tearing society apart in the shadows are often the exact same ones standing in the broad daylight, holding the pen that writes our laws. The corrupt officials settle into their bunker, reeking of arrogant wealth. Then the apex predator arrives, Dante Castellano. Mia has poured this kingpin's wine before, but she never dared to truly look at him. You simply do not study the face of the Reaper when his hands are wrapped around the throat of your city. Yet today, she finds herself unable to look away. He glides into the room like a starving wolf, flanked by two towering enforcers. His custom suit is a masterclass in silent intimidation. It is fascinating how the mind shatters under absolute pressure. In our darkest moments, while every instinct screams at us to run, we often find ourselves completely paralyzed, helplessly mesmerized by the exact fire destined to burn us alive. Dante possesses a polish only wealth can buy, yet his cold features demand total submission. He is striking in an icy, desolate way. His vacant sweep the room like a sniper selecting targets, bringing a suffocating pressure to the air. The instant he enters, the roaring chatter drops into a terrified silence. Giuseppe sweats profusely, offering a frantic respect he reserves for no one else. Mia flattens herself against the wall, silently praying to dissolve into the background. But those sniper eyes bypass the politicians and lock directly onto her battered face. It is a cruel irony of existence. The harder you attempt to shrink away and hide in the shadows, the faster the harshest spotlight will hunt you down to expose your deepest wounds. Was that a flicker of genuine recognition in Dante's eyes, or just morbid curiosity? Before Mia can process the moment, he disappears into the private suite. Her hands betray her, shaking violently. Dante is no ordinary phantom of the elite. The streets are soaked in the blood of his family's empire, and anyone with a shred of sense keeps their distance. Suddenly, a pale Giuseppe approaches, quietly informing her she is assigned to the private room tonight. Mia desperately tries to refuse, but Giuseppe is practically trembling. The Castellanos requested her specifically. We have all felt that sickening plunge in our gut. It is that terrifying second you hear the steel door of the cage finally click shut, and you suddenly realize that running away is off the table forever. Genuine heartbreak softens Giuseppe's tired eyes. He confesses he would shield her if he had the power, but denying a Castellano is a death sentence. Mia understands the fatal math. Squaring her exhausted shoulders, she glances at her ruined face in the mirror and pushes open the heavy doors. A dozen ruthless enforcers sit around the table, with Dante presiding over them like a dark monarch. Marco stands by the wall, studying her every motion. The room is thick with expensive tobacco and unspoken danger. Every instinct she possesses is screaming at her to flee. Yet she forces her hands to remain steady as she pours their drinks. True courage is never the absence of fear. It is feeling your knees buckle underneath you, yet forcing yourself to take the next step anyway. Mia drifts around the perimeter, filling crystal glasses while ignoring the predatory gazes stripping her down. In her world, this degradation is nothing new. But the moment she approaches Dante, the frequency of the room shifts. He glances up, and his detached boredom dissolves. He locks onto her bruised skin like he just unearthed a vital missing puzzle piece. Let us look at this closely, shall we? His polite mask shatters into something ice-cold. His voice slices through the vulgar laughter like a scalpel, demanding to know who dared to ruin her face. Instantly, all 12 hardened criminals fall completely quiet. It proves a dark truth about life. Sometimes, the most deeply terrifying thing you can experience in the center of a roaring hurricane is a sudden, absolute silence. Anticipating violence, Mia flinches away, bracing for a screech. Instead, Dante catches her chin, his touch unsettlingly gentle against her battered skin. He angles her face toward the light, asking again with a quiet, lethal calm who did this to her. Panic rises in her throat as she begs him to drop it, offering a hollow lie about a clumsy fall. The words taste like ash. Then, this kingpin softly brushes his thumb across her cheekbone, and that unexpected tenderness brings hot tears to her eyes. He speaks her name, warning her never to lie to him again. He already knows who she is. She pleads for him to let it go, terrified of losing her only income. Desperation is a vicious trap. It blinds us to the point where we fiercely defend the very cages that are actively destroying our lives. A flash of something unhinged breaks through the Don's icy exterior. Releasing her chin, he snaps his attention to his men. He orders them to dig up her address and the names of everyone she lives with, demanding a full dossier by sunset. Mia chokes on a fresh wave of panic, pleading with him to stop this madness. But Dante simply stares straight through her defenses. For a fraction of a second, the lonely human underneath the armor is entirely visible. He declares flatly that she is under his personal protection now, offering zero room for debate. A freezing dread settles deep in Mia's bones as she realizes her existence has just been hijacked. It is a haunting irony. We spend years begging for a savior, forgetting that salvation often requires a binding deal with the devil. The remainder of her shift blurs into a fever dream. Mia keeps her head bowed, pouring wine and forcing a hollow smile, while her reality fractures. She feels the heat of Dane's gaze tracking her every movement. When the syndicate finally departs, the adrenaline abandons her, leaving her legs to buckle. She retreats to the walk-in freezer, fighting to breathe through a massive panic attack. Giuseppe discovers her shivering in the cold, his posture sagging with defeat. He tells her to clock out early with full pay, offering a tragic squeeze to her shoulder. He murmurs that whatever unfolds next is entirely out of his hands. You and I have probably been exactly where she is. We rarely register the weight of a quiet warning until the hurricane has already torn the roof off our home. In the dim staff bathroom, Mia pulls on her threadbare hoodie, trying to steady her shaking hands. Stepping into the alley, she finds a sunset painted in bruised shades of purple. Lurking in the shadows is a pitch-black Mercedes sedan. Marco stands beside the open door, an immovable mountain of muscle, instructing her to get inside. She attempts to project confidence, insisting she will catch the bus, but Marco simply shakes his head. He states she can enter willingly, or he will physically throw her into the back seat. Recognizing the futility of her resistance, she surrenders and climbs in. The drive toward her neighborhood is swallowed by the heavy hum of the engine. When absolute authority strips away your free will, that suffocating silence becomes the loudest sound imaginable. As the vehicle stops outside her crumbling apartment, Marco turns to face her. He warns her to deadbolt her doors tonight. Castellanto does not issue empty threats. If the Don has declared her protected, she is untouchable. Mia sprints up the stairs, her heart slamming against her bruised ribs. What does protection from a kingpin mean for a broken waitress? Her cramped apartment sits in darkness. Marcus has not returned, likely wasting his paycheck at a dive bar. She ought to feel relieved, yet a suffocating dread pins her in place. She throws the bolt, draws the blinds, and sits motionless in the dark, waiting. Life teaches a bitter lesson in these quiet hours. Enduring the agonizing suspense of impending violence is somehow far worse than finally taking the blow to the jaw. Let us look at this scene together, you and I. Picture Mia sitting in complete darkness, every muscle locked tight, bracing for an inevitable disaster. Hours crawl by before Marcus shatters that quiet, kicking the door in, dragging the stench of cheap alcohol and blind rage into the room. She does not make a single sound as he hurls her against the drywall. She knows better than to fight back against a man who feeds on fear, curled on the filthy floorboards, tasting the sharp copper of her own blood. Her mind drifts to an impossible savior. She envisions Dante, the syndicate boss, stepping out of the shadows. When the human spirit is shoved right up against the edge of survival, it will grab hold of any lifeline it can find, even if that rope is firmly held by a monster. The camera pans slowly across the room, catching the pale, unforgiving morning light. It washes over Mia, curled on the floor, every shallow breath sounding like paper tearing in her chest. Fresh, deep purple bruises bloom across her pale skin, Simply existing feels like swallowing shattered glass, her fractured ribs protesting every microscopic shift. Marcus is already gone, naturally. He is the kind of man who evaporates long before the dust settles on the wreckage he caused. The apartment hangs heavy with the sour stench of stale beer and hollow regret. Stick with me here, because this is a truth we all have to learn. We often think peace returns the second a toxic person walks out the door. But honestly, that heavy, suffocating silence they leave behind is just a quieter, much more permanent form of violence. Mia stands rigid before the bathroom mirror. The harsh overhead bulb illuminates a face that belongs on a survivor in some grim psychological thriller. The quiet shatters when her phone buzzes against the porcelain sink. A text from Marco, the syndicate enforcer. A car will collect her at 6:30. Every instinct screams to ignore it, but her thumb hovers frozen over the glowing glass. Men with that much power do not understand the word no. Seeking mercy, she steps under the scalding shower, though the heat slices into her raw skin like tiny knives. She stands there until the water turns freezing, scrubbing at the nightmare. You can always paint over physical marks with heavy foundation, but the human soul never forgets exactly where the hardest blows landed. With mechanical precision, Mia layers thick powder over the purple shadows, building a fragile mask of normalcy. At exactly 6:30, a pitch-black Mercedes hums by the curb. Marco does not open her door. He watches in silence as she folds her aching frame into the back, praying her ribs hold together. The cabin swallows her, smelling of dangerous wealth, rich leather, and dark cologne. Their eyes meet in the rearview mirror, and Marco delivers the cold truth. The boss demands a meeting before her shift. Her blood instantly turns to ice, but the enforcer offers only an empty stare. It is a harsh reality you and I know all too well. The most terrifying journeys we ever take begin the second we surrender control of our lives to someone else. Marco attempts a dry joke, promising the boss does not bite, but the words only pull the knot in her chest tighter. The car glides through the damp city streets in total silence, leaving the peeling paint of her neighborhood behind. They slip into a district built entirely on billionaire ego, an empire of old money and cold glass that demands absolute submission. The vehicle descends into a cavernous underground garage beneath a towering skyscraper, easing into a spot painted with the name Castellano. Marco turns his head and flatly tells her to take the elevator to the 5th floor without delay. Notice the absolute weight of the moment. When true authority calls your name out of the dark, it never asks for permission. It simply issues cold commands you cannot afford to ignore. Trembling, Mia manages to choke out a whisper, asking what happens if she simply refuses to step out. Marco shoots her a look of genuine pity before handing her a heavy dose of reality. He will throw her over his shoulder and carry her upstairs if he has to. Trapped, she steps into an elevator lined entirely with polished mirrors. It feels like a psychological torture chamber, forcing her to stare at her ruined face from a dozen cruel angles. She looks impossibly small inside that gleaming metal box. The doors slide open to reveal a massive marble lobby where a receptionist barely glances up. You and I have probably both felt this kind of trap before. It truly does not matter if a room is painted in solid gold and draped in fine silk. A cage is always going to be a cage. The receptionist calls out Mia's name without a single shred of emotion, confirming this entire nightmare was heavily orchestrated from the start. Directed toward the inner office, Mia forces her heavy legs forward. They feel like columns of wet cement. She stops before towering, solid wood doors that scream of untouchable power. But before her shaking knuckles even brush the wood, Dante's rough voice booms from the other side, ordering her inside. He sees everything. The space beyond the doors feels massive, lined in dark mahogany, with giant windows pinning the city beneath his expensive shoes. He stands with his back turned, ending a phone call. Watch how the scene unfolds here. True power never actually needs to scream or wave its hands to command the entire room. Usually, a dangerous man like Dante is flanked by bodyguards, but today the massive room is empty. Without his usual wall of muscle, he looks strangely younger, yet undeniably more lethal. He holds up one sharp finger to silence Mia, verbally tearing someone apart over the phone in rapid, freezing Italian. The violence in his tone vibrates against the glass. He drops the receiver, and his dark eyes lock onto her face. Instantly, his cold composure violently shatters. He clears the room in 3 strides, grabbing her face and dragging her into the brutal sunlight. He growls that her husband did this, his voice shaking with absolute certainty. The harsh reality is that the people strong enough to save us usually carry a darkness just as terrifying as the monsters we flee. Mia scrambles for a lie, stammering out a weak story about tripping on the stairs. Dante crushes that excuse instantly. His chest rumbles as his voice drops to a terrifyingly soft whisper, warning her that he survives by reading people, and she is a tragic liar. He brushes his rough thumb across the swollen purple skin on her cheek. The touch is so shockingly tender that a broken sob escapes her throat. Up close, you can see the violent tension locking his jaw as he demands a name. Defeated, she whispers Marcus. Dante glances down at her bare fingers, pulling the humiliating truth from her lips. Her husband sold the wedding ring for liquor. It exposes a bitter truth. The deepest wounds we carry almost always come from the exact hands that promised to shelter us from the storm. Dante turns his back and, staring blindly at the sprawling skyline, he grips the thick mahogany desk, his knuckles turning the color of bleached bone under the strain. When he finally speaks, the anger is gone, replaced by a hollow chill. He asks how long she has been living in the dark. Mia chokes on her own breath, admits it has been 2 years. She is too broken to even call it abuse, forcing him to say the ugly word out loud. Warped by the cycle, she actually attempts to excuse her husband's rage. Dante spins back around, roaring at her defense, shaking the very air in the room. He declares the violence ends today. Look closely at this. You and I need to learn from her mistake. Shouldering the blame for another person's cruelty will only end up burying your own soul. Pure panic floods Mia's veins as she argues that a mafia boss cannot simply walk into her messy marriage. Dante practically shakes the plaster from the ceiling, roaring that he owns every inch of this city and operates entirely by his own laws. Stepping into her space, he places her under his personal syndicate protection. He swears that any man who leaves another mark on her will vanish before sunrise. Utterly lost, Mia asks why a feared kingpin cares about a nameless waitress. The heavy silence that follows feels eternal. Finally, he confesses that decades ago, his own mother served tables until his father rescued her from a monster. The psychology here is fascinating. Sometimes we go to the ends of the earth to save a stranger, just to heal the broken child still crying inside of us. Let us examine this quiet moment together. Dante, a ghost story of a man who commands an army of criminals, drops all his terrifying walls. With an unexpected grace, he lets his heavy, scarred knuckles gently graze the terrible swelling along Mia's cheekbone. He shares the brutal details of his past, explaining how watching his mother bleed carved out the very foundation of his soul. It is a staggering display of raw humanity from a man wrapped in steel. He stops being the cold syndicate boss and becomes a man staring directly at his own buried trauma. It reminds us of a quiet truth. Beneath the sharpest, most untouchable armor, people are usually just walking ghosts, desperately trying to rewrite the brutal tragedies they were too small to stop when they were young. The camera pushes in as Dante lowers his voice into a chilling, dead calm. He promises Mia that the next time her husband kicks open their door, expecting a helpless punching bag, he will find a mafia boss waiting in the dark. A sickening cocktail of sheer terror and desperate hope rises in her throat. Yet, completely ruined by the trauma bond, she actually begs Dante to spare Marcus's life. Dante studies her trembling shoulders. He agrees to let the man breathe, but swears Marcus will learn the agonizing cost of touching his property. This is the ultimate human tragedy. We so often throw our own bodies in front of the monsters who break us, simply because stepping into a brand new life is much more terrifying than surviving a pain we already know by heart. Mia squares her shoulders, insisting she belongs to no one. Dante simply steps closer. He leans in, his breath grazing her ear, and whispers a chilling truth. The very second he noticed the bruises on her skin and decided they offended him, her fate was permanently sealed. Turning toward the exit, he casually states Marco will drive her while he cleans up the mess. She calls out to Mr. Castellano, but his sharp features soften. "Call me Dante," he says. He makes it clear she never begged for protection. He chose to give it, and her husband has earned the nightmare. You and I need to understand something real. Salvation rarely shows up wearing pure white wings. Sometimes it arrives in a tailored suit, carrying the dangerous weight of the criminal underworld. The Don vanishes into the shadows, leaving Mia alone in the quiet office. Her pulse hammers against her ribs as reality sets in. Her life is permanently derailed. The rest of her shift blurs into a sickening haze of panic. She moves like a ghost, pouring wine with trembling hands, terrified her husband might kick the door down at any second. The old bartender leans over the counter to drop a heavy truth. The Castellano family fiercely protects whatever they claim, but they also completely own what they protect. Later, Marco drives her home as the sunset bleeds across the skyline. Let us look at this piece by piece. This ordeal teaches a grim lesson about survival. True freedom is rarely free. Sometimes, surviving simply means trading a broken cage for a beautiful one. A suffocating quiet fills the car, mimicking the heavy silence before a violent storm breaks. Mia sits frozen, staring up at her apartment building. Marco cuts the engine but leaves the doors locked tight. He mutters that the boss will arrive shortly to handle the situation. She asks how they plan to handle it, though her stomach already knows the dark answer. Catching her terrified gaze in the mirror, Marco says they will do whatever needs doing. He points at the neon diner across the street, forbidding her from going home. Out in the cold, she buys a bitter coffee she will never drink, watching her window like a ticking bomb. The hardest walk we take in this life is often stepping away from a familiar pain, straight into the terrifying dark of the unknown. 20 minutes bleed by before a black SUV creeps to the curb. Dante steps out into the streetlights, flanked by two mountains of scarred muscle. These men are not just hired hands. They are pure violence breathing the night air. From her booth, Mia watches them vanish into her building. 3 floors up, her living room lights flash to life. Her bruised ribs ache as she realizes the sheer force of the monster she just unleashed on her husband. Her coffee turns to ice water, but she grips the mug like a lifeline. Through the dusty glass, she sees brutal shadows dancing across her curtains. It is a tragic truth we all face eventually. The minute we decide to open our door to the dark, we lose the ability to control the terrifying shadows that slip inside. The shadows in the window start moving with violent jerks, twisting her stomach into a knot of dread. What are they doing to Marcus up there? Her survival instinct screams that her abusive husband deserves the boss's wrath. But the ghost of the man he used to be, long before the whiskey and the blind rage, makes her sick with heavy guilt. A waitress walks up, offering a warm refill. Mia softly says no. The woman hesitates, wanting to offer comfort, until a deadly glare from the counter chases her away. Mia blinks and realizes Marco is perched at the bar, watching her every move like a hawk. You might be wondering the same thing I did. True healing always requires letting go, but the rusted, heavy chains of a former love are entirely the most agonizing ones to break. Marco casually lifts his mug like it is a normal Tuesday, and right at that second, the lights in Mia's apartment completely black out. Her heart practically stops, and she scrambles to bolt from the booth, but Marco slams his massive hand onto her shoulder, pinning her down. Stay, he growls, offering zero room for debate. Mia is shaking, desperately asking if Marcus is even still breathing. Marco looks her dead in the eye. The boss always keeps his promises, he states plainly. He is breathing, but he will not be walking for a very long time. It is a normal human reaction to want karma to strike the people who break us. But here is the hard truth. Brutal revenge rarely brings real peace. Often, it just trades your old daily panic for a brand new kind of aching pain. The diner door squeaks open, and Dante glides inside. He looks like the untouchable phantom from this morning. Crisp suit, perfect hair, moving like a star. But Mia instantly feels a terrifying energy radiating off him. He slides into the booth, and the details are staggering. His knuckles are busted open, raw and crusted with fresh blood. A vivid splatter of red stains his pristine collar. His eyes look like endless black holes. He stares at her and calmly says it is done. When she begs to know what he actually did to Marcus, Dante gives her a frozen stare. He did what needed doing. The lesson here is deeply chilling. Some men do not merely survive their darkest times. They fully embrace the violent shadows, learning to wear them like a perfectly custom tailored suit. Dante reaches across the table and grabs her shaking hand. He rubs soft circles into her palm, terrifying considering he just destroyed a man with those exact hands. He promises her, his voice smooth as glass, that Marcus will never touch her again. When she reminds him he swore he would not kill the guy, Dante hits her with a slow, dark smile. He did not end Marcus, he explains, but he completely broke him. He made sure Marcus knew what would happen if he ever breathed in Mia's direction again. Cowards only understand brute force. The intensity is too much, and she snatches her hand back, trembling. Take this heavy lesson to heart. True power is not about simply destroying your enemies. It is about knowing how to make them live every single day in abject, paralyzing fear. She quietly asks what happens now, and Dante stands up from the booth. He casually buttons his jacket like they are heading out for dinner, instead of dealing with the wreckage of her life. He tells her to pack a bag because she is done living in that apartment. When she cries that she has nowhere else to go, Dante drops the ultimate mandate. You are staying with me, he says. It is not an ask, it is an order. Her old building was a trap anyway, full of broken locks and terrified neighbors. He refuses to leave her vulnerable while Marcus plots his next move. Stick with me here, because you and I need to remember this truth. The exact moment you finally manage to outrun one terrible storm, you almost always find yourself standing right in the dead center of a massive hurricane. Mia snaps back, asking if she is basically his prisoner now. Dante gets a wild, dangerous flash in his dark eyes. He leans in close, caging her in by gripping both sides of her chair. He tells her she is his responsibility now, and that is a very different thing. He smells like a mix of fresh blood, expensive cologne, and pure danger. He breaks down her choices in a terribly smooth voice. She can walk away right now. She can march back to her apartment and wait for Marcus to turn her into a punching bag again, hiding her bruises with makeup. That is the harsh reality of our existence. Freedom is a heavy burden. Sometimes your only real option is not choosing between a perfect fairy tale and total ruin. Sometimes you just have to decide which monster gets to hold the keys. Look at this incredible power move. Dante is staring her down, dropping the coldest line by telling her that her life flipped upside down. The second he decided to claim her, Mia is totally freaking out. Her brain is screaming that trading a basic, toxic loser for a Mafia boss is just upgrading the wallpaper in her prison cell. But her exhausted, battered soul thinks maybe this new cage comes with softer bars. She finally caves, her voice shaking, and asks how long this terrifying deal lasts. Dante hits her with that mysterious smirk, saying, "As long as it takes." It is a heavy psychological shift to witness. Sometimes you hit absolute rock bottom, and jumping blindly into the wild unknown actually feels far safer than going back to the nightmare you already survived. Marco shatters the heavy tension, rattling the car keys. Vincent has already packed Mia's life into one pathetic little bag. Dante stands there, waiting for her to make her choice. Mia closes her eyes, flashing back to that grimy apartment and the 2 years of hell she barely survived. She pictures Marcus crying on the floor, knowing his fake apologies always turn back into swinging fists. Feeling the ache in her ribs, she whispers that she will go. Dante sweeps her away to his untouchable penthouse in the sky. She takes a private elevator straight into a lobby dripping in Mafia money. Leaving a toxic past always sounds so incredibly simple, but willingly stepping into a totally alien world takes a reckless kind of courage most people never actually find. Let us look closely at the physical space Dante occupies tonight. The camera pans across a cold expanse designed to intimidate. Massive windows frame the sleeping city, casting sharp shadows that suggest he owns the skyline. The minimalist furniture whispers of absurd wealth, yet the room remains utterly hollow, feeling like a sterile museum of power. Directing Mia toward the hall, he peels off his ruined suit jacket. As he rolls up his sleeves, the harsh overhead lighting catches a startling contradiction. We see jagged, pale scars trailing down to the split, raw knuckles he just used to dismantle her abusive husband. We often forget a harsh truth about our world. The most immaculate, untouchable spaces are frequently built by violent hands that have weathered the absolute ugliest extremes of human nature. Mia remains anchored to the freezing marble floor, her slight frame paralyzed by the shifting reality of the night. Should she thank this lethal underworld figure for erasing her abuser, or beg him to reveal the hidden cost of his protection? Dante reads the frantic pulse at her throat perfectly. Moving to the mahogany bar, he pours 2 heavy crystal glasses of whiskey. He hands her one, stating plainly that he knows she fears his true motive. When he calmly insists he wants nothing in return, Mia shakes her head, knowing men of his terrifying status never deal in charity. A flash of dark amusement crosses his face. He asks how she perceives him, and she whispers that he is dangerous. Constant suspicion functions as heavy iron armor. It shields our fragile hearts from further ruin, but it inevitably locks us away from experiencing any unexpected grace. Gripping her glass, she insists that dangerous men never rescue shattered waitresses out of pure kindness. Dante closes the distance, his towering shadow swallowing her frame. His voice drops into a gravelly rumble to deliver a sharp reality check. He tells her she is far from broken. Damaged, certainly, but broken things cannot strike back, and she has fought for survival every single day. When Mia whispers that she is barely surviving, the hard lines of his face suddenly soften. He reminds her that sometimes merely drawing breath is the absolute ultimate victory. He vanishes to manage his syndicate, leaving his massive enforcer at her door. We must remember something essential here. There is profound strength in simply refusing to shatter, even when a brutal world repeatedly swings its heaviest hammer directly at your exhausted soul. You and I need to carefully unpack the heavy gravity of this moment. Dante operates with terrifying ruthlessness, declaring he is sending a visceral message to anyone who dares to cross her. While that intense possessive energy should typically trigger every warning alarm in her mind, Mia instead experiences a profound, entirely unfamiliar rush of safety. When she quietly questions his sudden investment in her ruined life, Dante falls into a dead, heavy silence. The camera lingers as his dark eyes turn inward. He reveals that he was only 5 years old when he stood in a doorway, watching his mother desperately try to paint over her bruised jaw with cheap makeup. It forces us to realize a haunting truth. Sometimes, the deepest and most painful scars we carry ultimately become the strongest shields we use to protect those who cannot defend themselves. The room grows heavy as Dante shares the memory of hearing his mother weeping through thin walls every single night. As a terrified, powerless child, he begged the universe to end the nightmare. Setting his glass down with a sharp clink, he reveals the dark engine behind his rise. He swore a blood vow to mercilessly eliminate any man who uses fists to feel strong. It is a staggering confession from the untouchable ruler of the underworld. When Mia asks about our father, the muscles in his jaw clench. He reveals his father was the former crime boss, a ruthless man who found his mother working as a broken waitress, mirroring Mia's tragic reality poverty perfectly. The lesson here is undeniable. Often, our fiercest, most unshakable purpose is born directly from the exact moments we felt the absolute most pathetic and completely helpless. His mother was running from a monster, desperate to keep her boy alive. The former syndicate boss fell fiercely in love, married her, and raised Dante to inherit a shadowed empire before delivering ultimate retribution to her ex. When Mia holds her breath to ask what became of the man, Dante does not even blink. With freezing detachment, he states the body was pulled from a muddy river 3 months later, wrapped in heavy iron chains with shattered legs. Instead of pulling away in moral horror, Mia feels a twisted, undeniable thrill of satisfaction warming her blood. She realizes Dante is rescuing her to quietly mend the open fractures of his own haunted past. We see this human pattern repeatedly. Sometimes, the only true way to heal your deepest trauma is by saving another person from suffering the exact same brutal fate. Mia assumes she is merely a fragile ghost of his mother, but Dante shuts that tragic narrative down. Stepping into her space, he raises a scarred hand to gently cup her cheek. A shocking display of tenderness from a lethal syndicate leader, he states she represents everyone made to feel powerless, and with his authority, he is flipping the script. His calloused thumb grazes her fading bruise, drawing a gasp of pain that bleeds into undeniable chemistry. His dark eyes cloud with quiet fury. In a low whisper, he instructs her to sleep while he disposes of tomorrow's garbage, leaving her alone with a hammering heart. This brings us to a vital truth. Real strength is never about enduring every single fight alone. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is have the courage to let somebody else carry your heaviest burdens. Stick with me, because the entire dynamic shifts right here. Just yesterday, Mia was a broken woman suffocating within a violent cycle. Tonight, she is isolated in a sprawling penthouse, guarded by the most feared boss in the city. The beautiful irony? She feels more secure than she has in years, turning the heavy brass lock on the guest bedroom door. A fragile spark of hope finally ignites in her chest. Yet, sleep remains impossible. The space is overwhelmingly large, drowning in muted grays that project intimidating wealth. She feels like a desperate trespasser, even as the plush mattress yields like a cloud beneath her bruised bones. It proves how rapidly existence can pivot. One moment, you are suffocating in the dark, and the next, a terrifying stranger places the master key into your hands to finally unlock your own cage. For agonizing hours, Mia lies paralyzed, tracing shadows across the vaulted ceiling. At 3 a.m, the metallic slide of the elevator breaks the quiet. She catches the commanding baritone of Dante, trading rapid whispers with his enforcer before silence reclaims the penthouse. Eventually, bone-deep exhaustion drags her under. She wakes to brilliant sunlight flooding the glass. The rich aroma of roasted coffee drifts down the hall. For one beautiful, fragmented second, she forgets the trauma entirely. Then reality strikes like a physical blow, resurrecting the sickening memory of her husband and Dante's blood-stoked vow. Her phone suddenly vibrates against the nightstand, shattering the quiet. It is a tragic human flaw that we crave the morning light, forgetting that waking up demands we face the exact brutal reality we desperately tried to sleep through. The glowing screen reveals a extra from her manager. She has a week off, fully paid. Dante is already pulling invisible strings, seizing control of her life without a single conversation. Mia knows she should be alarmed by this overreach, but instead, a massive wave of relief washes over her. She can finally stop pretending she is fine. Stepping under the marble shower, she lets the scalding water beat against her aching ribs, melting away the terror of yesterday. Emerging into the bedroom, she freezes. Her meager belongings are already neatly unpacked in the massive closet. His syndicate completely erased her old life overnight. Pulling on a thick sweater to hide her bruises, she realizes something profound. Surrendering control to a dangerous stranger is terrifying, but sometimes it is the absolute only way to finally drop your heavy shield and just breathe. Let us observe how this tense morning unfolds. Mia steps out of the bedroom, the dark bruises on her jaw fading to a dull yellow. Her makeup is no longer a desperate attempt to hide her shame. Today, it is deliberate battle armor. Walking into the sunlit kitchen, she finds Dante casually leaning against the marble counter. Dressed in tailored slacks and a crisp white shirt, sipping espresso, he projects the flawless image of a completely normal man. Yet that comfortable, domestic illusion shatters the second his calculating eyes lock onto hers. He offers her coffee with a smooth, hypnotic murmur. Here is a crucial lesson to remember. The most dangerous predators never look like monsters in the morning light. We routinely mistake their quiet stillness for genuine softness, entirely forgetting the lethal hellfire constantly burning right beneath the surface. You and I know exactly what is happening here. Mia pours coffee simply to give her trembling hands a task. Gripping the warm mug like a lifeline, she fiercely tells Dante he did not have to do this, insisting she is not his burden. Dante glides around the island with the silent grace of an apex predator. In a dangerously calm voice, he states she became his responsibility the exact second he decided she was. When she snaps that she is not some broken problem to be fixed, his dark gaze strips away her armor. He replies that she is simply someone who desperately needed saving but forgot how to ask. Let this truth sink in. Asking for help is never an act of surrender. Sometimes, reaching out an empty hand is the single bravest thing a battered spirit can do. Suddenly, the brass elevator chimes ring sharply, shattering the quiet tension of the room. Let us frame this scene together, you and I. The heavy steel doors part with a harsh metallic grind, revealing Marco flanking a sharp woman clutching a dark briefcase. Dante offers a microscopic nod, introducing Rebecca Chen, a ruthless titan in family law. When she extends a hand wrapped in quiet empathy, the camera pushes in on Mia. Her eyes dart wildly. She stammers, lost, asking why she needs an attorney. Dante does not blink. With the chilling calm of a man discussing the rain, he tells her she is filing for divorce. Rebecca is a legal architect designed to obliterate domestic abusers. The biggest turning points in life never knock politely. They simply shatter the locks and demand you finally step into the terrifying light of freedom. The lighting shifts, casting half of Dante's face in shadow as he lays out a flawless legal strategy. Rebecca will carry the agonizing weight of this warfare, enforcing strict restraining orders. Mia only has to surrender the raw truth. The gravity of this maneuver leaves her unmoored. She trembles, whispering that he cannot unilaterally end her marriage. Dante steps closer, his voice dropping to a low, unforgiving rumble. He demands she look him in the eyes and ties, and confess she wants to stay chained to a monster. The lie dies in her throat before it ever touches the air. It is a suffocating psychological barrier. For anyone conditioned by deep trauma, peace feels like an ambush. They are trained to believe that reaching for a better life will only draw more blood. Watch closely as the power dynamic pivots in this frame. Mia physically shrinks, grasping at a desperate defense. She whispers she could never afford an elite attorney. Dante shatters that excuse instantly. The fee is already paid in full. He wields this lawyer like a custom-forged weapon in his dark arsenal. When Mia nervously asks how they could possibly have proof, Rebecca unzips the bag. The camera tilts down to reveal a meticulously gathered armory of truth. Covert photos from the rainy cafe. Buried medical files from midnight clinic runs. They mapped out her entire nightmare while she slept. It reveals something profound about human loyalty. True protectors never offer empty promises. They quietly build an impenetrable fortress around you long before you even realize the storm has finally arrived. Rebecca casually drops the final nail in the coffin. They have sworn statements from co-workers who notice the faded bruises blooming under Mia's collars. They hold an absolutely bulletproof case, waiting only for her whisper of a yes. Mia stares at Dante, completely frozen in the frame. This ruthless underworld boss is systematically dismantling her toxic marriage. When she demands to know why he is fighting so violently for her, Dante holds her gaze. Because she refuses to save herself, he murmurs. She asks what he stands to gain, and a sudden, jagged flicker of raw agony crosses his marble features. The subtext here is heavy and undeniable. Sometimes, fighting a bloody war to save another human being is the only way we know how to silence the screaming ghosts of our own tragic past. The psychological evolution in this moment is breathtaking. Mia sits perfectly still, absorbing the weight of Dante's confession. For the first time, the impenetrable Don lets a visible fracture run through his armor. He quietly asks for her trust, but only when she is ready to give it. It is a cinematic declaration that her soul is worth defending. Overcome, she turns to Rebecca and asks what must be done. Cut to 3 hours later. Mia stands alone on the sweeping penthouse balcony, the cold wind whipping her hair against the glittering city lights. The sound drops away into a serene, heavy quiet. It challenges a stubborn lie we all tell ourselves. We are taught that true strength means bleeding alone, but sometimes finding the courage to let someone else carry your heavy armor is the bravest act of all. Rebecca exits the frame, carrying enough legal poison to bury Marcus forever. The restraining order hits tonight. The divorce filings launch tomorrow. The nightmare is officially over. Yet, the camera lingers on Mia's hollow expression. The ropes binding her have been slashed, leaving her dangling. Dante steps onto the terrace, 2 glasses of dark red wine in his hands. He offers her one without a word and sinks into the chair beside her. They sit in profound silence as the velvet sky settles over the concrete jungle. It paints a painfully jarring portrait of trauma recovery. True freedom rarely feels like a triumphant liberation at first. It feels exactly like a terrifying free fall, right up until the miraculous moment you remember how to fly. The tension breaks when Dante's low voice rumbles through the dark, asking if she is having second thoughts. Mia takes a slow sip of wine, her hands trembling as she admits a fragile uncertainty. Think about the twisted psychological irony we are watching unfold. Years ago, she believed her lawful husband was a savior. Tonight, she relies on a ruthless syndicate boss to stay alive. When she challenges his control, Dante does not flinch. He clarifies he is merely handing her the keys her abuser buried. He points to the door, stating she can walk out right now, untouched, and his protection will follow her regardless. It is a masterclass in genuine devotion. True power is never about trapping a broken soul in a beautiful cage. True power is opening the door and letting them choose the wide open sky. Watch how the center of gravity shifts entirely in this frame. Dante turns. The ambient light catches the sharp angles of his face as his gaze anchors onto hers, stripping away every lie. He confesses he started this for her mother, but now he is doing it for her. When Mia asks what she means to him, the hardened Don admits he does not know, but he intends to find out. The atmospheric tension is suffocating. She is bleeding from domestic terror. He is bathed in underworld violence. Every instinct screams this collision will end in a tragic fire. Just as she breathes his name, his phone violently buzzes against the glass table. His warm eyes immediately snap back into cold stone. It is a brutal cinematic truth we all face eventually. Destiny has an absolute hatred for perfect timing. Dante murmurs a low apology, the romantic spell shattered. He steps into the shadows, revealing her former husband has made a fatal miscalculation. Marcus has marched into the restaurant hunting for her. Dante's tone drops into a chilling, dead-eyed calm. He gave his warning. Now, the man pays the toll. Panic flares in Mia's chest. She chases his silhouette inside, her voice breaking as she desperately begs Dante to spare her abuser's life. Pausing at the open elevator, the Don throws a cold glance over his shoulder. He promises to let the man breathe for one reason only, because she asked. It highlights a deeply tragic flaw in the human heart. We possess an agonizing habit of throwing our own bodies in front of the very monsters who spent years trying to break us. Come with me. You and I are about to watch this fragile piece shatter. Dante locks his darkened gaze onto Mia, his voice laced with a lethal warning. His patience is drained. If her abuser keeps pushing, the rules dissolve. The elevator doors open, framing Marco like a grim reaper in a dark suit. He delivers the tense report. Marcus has crashed the restaurant with 3 enforcers, threatening blood. Dante's jaw sets into absolute granite. He demands a cold, tactical assessment. Marco smoothly replies they have 2 soldiers on the floor and 4 more closing the net. Dante exhales a dark, satisfied breath. It is a harsh truth of our nature. A personal boundary is nothing but a ghost until you are finally prepared to go to war to enforce it. Dante steps backward into the elevator, radiating the aura of an apex predator. He commands Mia to throw every deadbolt and ignore everyone but Marco. The heavy doors slide shut with a final thud. Instantly, the sprawling silence of the penthouse swallows her whole. The camera stays close on her face as her pulse hammers against her ribs. A sickening wave of misplaced guilt threatens to pull her under. She believes her violent husband will burn the restaurant to ash simply because she dared to run. She has internalized the venom that she is a broken thing, destined to bleed on anyone who tries to bandage her wounds. Retreating to the dark bedroom, she twists the lock against a cold city. It is a devastating reality. Irrational guilt is undeniably the heaviest anchor a human soul can drag. Down in the neon-soaked streets, a symphony of violence is being orchestrated on Mia's behalf. Notice the profound shift happening upstairs. Sitting in the dark, she feels zero pity for her tormentor. Suddenly, her phone's screen flashes, casting a harsh blue glow across her face. A text from an unknown number. Marcus is promising a bloody hunt. Her hands shake violently as she forwards the threat to Marco. His call comes seconds later, ordering her to ignore the phantom number. Dante is out there handling the physical war, while the legal team will use this exact message to bury the abuser forever. You and I have probably felt that creeping dread before, but remember this truth: fear is a masterful liar. It exists only to convince your exhausted mind that the dark will never actually end. Mia's voice shakes as she leads, needing to know if Dante survived. Marco dismisses her panic with the frozen calm of a veteran enforcer. "The boss is always fine," he murmurs. He knows the brutal truth. Abusive men only bow to a heavier fist. The line clicks dead. Mia stands in the shadowed penthouse, gripping the plastic. You and I need to look closely at this second, because it is the moment her old life burns to ash. She has crossed into Dante's violent orbit, and beneath her terror, a dark thrill pulses. Hours later, Dante steps from the midnight shadows to find her curled on his velvet couch, too anxious to claim a real bed. Growth is deeply unsettling, but throwing yourself into the unknown is often the only way to escape the ghosts of your past. Mia gasps awake, panic fading only when she spots Dante in the shadows. The invincible king of the city looks shattered. His shirt is torn, and blood ruins the white collar, the grim reality of his world bleeding into her sanctuary. He pulls off his tie and heads for the decanter, catching her wide eyes in the mirror. Before she can hide, the raw truth spills out. She whispers that she was terrified for him. Dante goes rigid. The ruthless mask he wears for his enemies cracks. He turns, asking softly if she actually worried for a man built on violence. She hugs her knees, confessing how deeply the fear gripped her. He downs a heavy pour of whiskey to numb the sudden shock. Vulnerability is a brutal weight, best poured out when the rest of the world is fast asleep. Dante leans against the bar, delivering the news with chilling calm. Marcus and his thugs are bleeding in a hospital with shattered ribs. It was a masterclass in calculated force, not murder, but a violent psychological brand. Mia covers her mouth, terrified the restaurant was caught in the crossfire. Dante promises the brutality stayed hidden in a dark alley. Taking a slow sip of his drink, he adds that Marcus sealed his own fate by breaking the restraining order. Those unhinged messages handed the lawyers everything needed for a long prison sentence. Mia sags back, drowning in a bitter mix of relief and guilt. She whispers she never wanted this violence. No one truly desires chaos, but sometimes protecting your inner peace requires watching the ground beneath your abusers burn to ash. Dante sets his glass down. He closes the distance, anchoring his hands on Mia's shoulders. His dark eyes pierce her guilt to deliver bitter truth. Men like Marcus never wake up with a moral compass. They consume every inch of light until a larger predator forces them to stop. He insists the blame rests entirely on her abuser. Mia stares up at this terrifying crime boss who has morphed into her guardian. She smells the sharp copper of blood mixed with his cedar cologne, a dizzying reminder of his lethal nature. She whispers she has no idea how to repay him. His thumb traces her jawline as he warns the real war is only beginning. You and I know that true safety is rarely born from quiet peace. Sometimes you must stand tall inside a brutal storm to finally secure it. Dante refuses to paint a pretty picture. Marcus might be in a cell, but his family's venomous loyalty will demand blood. Dante insists Mia must remain hidden inside his fortress. When she asks how long she must hide, his dark eyes lock onto hers. As long as it takes, he murmurs. He offers the illusion of choice, claiming she is free to walk away. Yet his rigid posture begs her to stay. Logic screams at Mia to run. Binding her fate to a crime boss is a line she can never uncross. But she is completely exhausted from shrinking her spirit just to survive. She exhales a trembling breath and willingly chooses the danger, whispering that she will stay. The greatest leaps of faith happen when we stop fighting the terrifying current and let it carry us to an entirely new shore. The second she yields, a flash of primal triumph ignites in Dante's icy gaze. He steps close, framing her face with heavy, calloused hands. He tilts her chin, demanding to know if she truly understands her choice. Her pulse beats a frantic rhythm as she admits she has no idea. Dante's jaw tightens with agonizing restraint. He vows that staying makes her his absolute responsibility. His duty is to fiercely protect against any threat. A consuming possession like this should trigger every alarm bell in her mind. Instead, a strange warmth floods her veins. When she breathlessly asks what he gains from this chaotic deal, he exhales one heavy word. He pulls her entirely out of a cruel world's reach. Real love, in its most terrifying form, is simply an iron shield we forge around the souls we refuse to lose. The camera pushes in close, capturing the heavy silence. Dante reaches up, his thumb grazing her bruised lip with terrifying reverence. He is reading the map of her trauma, and his dark eyes shatter. His voice drops into a gravelly whisper, begging her to stop him, giving her the power to walk away. But Mia does not step back. Here in this empire of violence, framed by shadows, she has never felt so safe. She rises to her toes and presses her mouth to his. The fragile question shatters, igniting a desperate, raw hunger as he pulls her close. It is a beautiful tragedy. The most radical choice you can ever make is allowing yourself to trust another human being after the world has completely broken you. Stick with me here, because this is where the lighting shifts and the scene transforms. Dante buries his hands into her hair, desperate to erase the empty space. Mia dissolves into his grip, surrendering to the rush of being truly seen. When they break apart, the tension hums like a live wire. He rests his forehead against hers, warning her that stepping from a nightmare marriage into his arms crosses a dangerous moral line. But Mia steps back, anchoring her fierce gaze to his. She asks, voice perfectly steady, if she is finally allowed to decide what she wants. A dark smirk breaks his rigid expression. She is no longer a victim trembling in the cold. The ultimate power move in life is ruthlessly reclaiming the right to write your own story. Stepping blindly into the void is a paralyzing act. Yet the lens captures Mia holding his gaze, refusing to blink, declaring she is choosing him despite the heavy consequences. Dante offers a grim, shadow-soaked confession. He operates in a blood-stained reality, and his nature is dangerously possessive. She forces a light laugh, joking about becoming a prisoner locked away in his glass tower. He stares right through the humor, his face softening with a rare smile as he admits he absolutely does not share. Mia fiercely reminds him she is not a piece of property. He steps closer, the shadows swallowing them, agreeing she is infinitely more valuable than that. Never forget that recognizing your true worth is the strongest armor you can wear into any battle. The next 3 weeks play out in a surreal cinematic montage of striking visual contrast. Dante looks down with quiet reverence, confessing she is the first pure thing he has chosen to protect in years. Their penthouse life becomes a bizarre theater of warm domesticity wrapped around cold mafia warfare. They sleep in separate beds, but the tension vibrates through the walls. The camera pans from Mia cooking quietly to Dante, orchestrating violent deals on the balcony. She learns his physical language, watching his shoulders lock into granite. Outside this bubble, reality crashes in. A call reveals Marcus is shivering in a county cell. Sometimes, you absolutely must retreat into the quiet to repair your soul, but you should never stop tracking the storm raging outside your window. Have you ever been trapped in a dark hallway, halfway between a slammed door and a terrifying new threshold? That is Mia's exact psychological address right now. Marcus is rotting in lockup, begging for a plea, and her divorce is 60 days away. She should be celebrating. Instead, the director frames her trapped in stillness, wedged between the wreckage of her history and the lethal reality of her protector. Even Marco, his cold executioner, starts dropping off fresh pastries. Yet none of that gentle comfort registers in her eyes. Her mind is hijacked by the inescapable gravity of Dante. You can build a fortress of total comfort, but your spirit will always gravitate toward the single person who forces your heart to beat again. When the heavy doors shut, the untouchable crime boss sheds his armor. The camera lingers as Mia becomes the silent archivist of his hidden darkness. She watches this lethal man jolt awake from cold sweats, his hand instinctively dropping toward the loaded weapon by his bed. Yet hours later, the lighting softens as she listens to him murmur in gentle Italian during calls with his mother. The duality is staggering. A man drowning in blood, yet painfully gentle with her. They fiercely avoid placing any title on this dynamic. Dating feels too trivial, and a relationship carries too much traumatic weight. They simply exist in this unnamed gray zone as the pressure builds. You cannot ignore a buried spark forever, because the universe will inevitably strike a match and burn it all down. Let us look at this shattered sanctuary. Mia stands in the quiet kitchen, steam from her tea curling into the air. Without warning, the heavy penthouse doors violently burst open. Dante storms over the threshold, his posture so rigid with rage that the room feels suddenly cold. Marco and Vincent slip in behind him, quiet as ghosts. Dante crosses the floor, gripping her shoulders to deliver the crushing blow. Marcus is out on bail. He already violated the restraining order, tearing through her old streets, threatening anyone to find her. The truth we often forget is that a legal document is just ink on paper. It will never stop a broken man who has nothing left to lose. Ultimately, you must always be ready to defend your own peace. You and I need to watch how morality twists here. Dante paces the floor like a caged wolf, consumed by raw fury. He curses himself for not burying Marcus earlier. Knowing money makes desperate people talk. Mia reaches out, pleading with him to hold on to his humanity. Dante stops, gently framing her face with his trembling hands. He confesses that he tried trusting the courts, but the law completely failed her. A predator is hunting her, and Dante refuses to let her be the prey. He turns to Marco, his voice dropping to a freezing whisper, ordering him to drag Marcus to the warehouse in silence. The harsh reality of life is this. When the systems built to protect you look the other way, survival often requires someone willing to burn the old rules to the ashes on your behalf. Marco vanishes into the elevator like a shadow. Mia lunges forward, grabbing Dante before he surrenders to his violent instincts. She begs him not to cross that ultimate line for her protection or for his own soul. Dante freezes. His voice drops to a terrifying calm as he admits he is doing this for his own sanity. Her ex leaves him no other choice if he wants her alive. He pulls her against his chest, kisses her forehead, and speaks his darkest truth. He would rather be the monster who guarantees her safety than the good man who weeps at her funeral. Mia looks up through her tears, promising him that he is no monster, leaving him speechless. The quiet lesson is profound. Those who truly love you will recognize your light, even when you tip into absolute darkness to protect them. The camera pushes in close. Mia looks this terrifying syndicate leader dead in the eyes, stripping away his lethal facade. She tells him he is merely a man carrying too much darkness for reasons he believes are righteous. Her voice is soft as she confesses she is falling in love with him, embracing the shadows he tries to hide. Dante stares back as if she handed him a delicate glass object he is terrified to shatter. Overwhelmed, his strict control snaps. He pulls her into a fierce, desperate kiss that speaks volumes of his silent longing. Pulling away breathless, he orders her to lock the doors, promising to return before sunrise. The defining lesson is clear. Sometimes, the most damaged people offer the exact kind of fierce, unapologetic love we need to finally heal our own deep wounds. Her confession shatters his defenses. Dante admits he loved her from the exact moment he saw her bruises, feeling an overwhelming urge to destroy whoever caused them. He fell for her defiance, and that protective rage is why he must finish the job. In a heartbeat, he vanishes. We stay with Mia. She is left pacing the floor, her anxiety spiraling as the hours stretch into an unbearable crawl. She fears that if Dante takes a life tonight, that violence will poison their future forever. She keeps watch until dawn bleeds a soft pink across the sky. At last, the heavy elevator chimes. Dante steps into the morning sun, completely alone. This leaves us with a stark truth. The silent, paranoid anticipation of a brutal storm is often far more agonizing than enduring the actual storm itself. Let's pause here. Dante appears utterly destroyed. His tailored suit is ruined with blood, and his knuckles are split, yet his eyes hold an unnatural calm. He announces that the problem is handled. Mia rushes to him, trembling as she asks the heavy question. Did he take a life? Dante catches her hands and reveals the twist. He did not kill the man. He forced Marcus onto a flight to Mexico with $50,000 and a promise of certain death if he returns. Relief causes Mia to collapse against him in tears. asking why he chose mercy. His cold facade breaks. He answers that he spared the man simply because she asked him to. The lesson is undeniable. True power is never measured by your capacity to destroy an enemy, but by your strength to choose mercy when it matters most. Stick with me here. You and I have followed the descent, and the real truth finally emerges. Dante quietly confesses that his love for her vastly outweighs his hatred for her abuser. He craves a real future, not a life spent running from the law. Mia admits the depth of her love terrifies her. Dante replies that fears is necessary. It proves she is finally awake to something genuine. As the morning sunlight floods the room, the cinematic shift is striking. The heavy burden of her past is eradicated. The nightmare of the last 2 years is dead and buried. What remains is untamed, intimidating, yet profoundly beautiful. This brings us to a crucial realization. You cannot step into a brilliant new chapter until you find the courage to let your toxic history burn entirely to the ashes. Visualize them standing in the silent aftermath of the wreckage. The morning light is soft. Mia rests against his chest, her voice fragile as she asks what happens next. Dante, a man whose existence has been defined by violence, pulls her closer. He tells her that now they build. She gets the space to heal, and he must learn to be a partner rather than a loaded weapon. There are no illusions of a perfect fairy tale here. He simply offers a solemn vow to wake up and earn her grace every single day. She rises to meet his lips, pouring years of unspoken trauma into the connection. From the ashes of disaster, they forged something unbreakable. The philosophy here is profound. Sometimes the darkest, most bitter soil is the exact environment you need to grow the deepest and strongest roots. The camera cuts. We jump forward 6 months to observe Mia's transformation. It is difficult to shed the weight of trauma, but look at her now. She stands confidently behind the bar at Romano's, serving drinks to oblivious patrons who have no idea she wears the ring of the city's most dangerous syndicate leader. Dante occupies his shadowed corner booth. He continues to manage his empire, yet his focus is locked entirely on her. Mia smiles from across the room, her thumb tracing the heavy diamond resting on her left hand. We arrive at a beautiful realization about life. True safety does not mean locking yourself away in a quiet, isolated tower. Real safety is having the courage to stand in the chaotic center of the world, certain that your partner will defend you against anything. Let's look closer at the psychological weight here. Dante presents his late mother's ring, his steady hands visibly trembling. It is a profound crack in his lethal armor, bringing Mia to tears. The brilliance of her character lies in her independence. She deliberately keeps her waitressing job, building her own identity. She proves she is a hardened survivor, not a fragile doll locked in a golden cage. Across the crowded restaurant, Dante meets her gaze, offering a quiet smirk of pride. Observe the incredible cinematic evolution. She transformed from a terrified victim into an empowered woman commanding her own fate. This teaches us a vital truth. No matter how agonizing the previous chapters of your life were, they never hold the power to dictate the final shape of your tomorrow. Let's be honest as we wrap this up. Their daily reality remains remarkably chaotic. Dante is still tethered to a violent underworld, carrying the heavy burden of lethal consequences. But the true beauty of this narrative lies in their fierce devotion. They belong to one another, not as a conqueror and a captured prize, but as absolute equals. They are simply two fractured human beings who wake up and consciously choose to love each other despite the odds. You and I often spend our lives chasing the illusion of a flawless, painless romance. The ultimate lesson this story offers is refreshingly gritty. True love is rarely about securing absolute peace. It is about finding the one person whose internal storm matches your own and deciding to bravely walk through the heavy rain together.